Fact.
Mm.
Hello. So I guess we are live. Hey, welcome. I am the Everyday Junglist. Welcome to the Intelligent Nonsense podcast and a really special episode today. I finally was able to cajole my wife, Jen, to join. I've been trying for a very long time to get her to come on and talk about some of the stuff she knows about, and she knows about a lot of different things. But she finally agreed, so I've talked her into it. She's here. She's not actually on camera. She's in the house. I can say that much, but she's not on camera. She's just downstairs from me for different reasons. But it doesn't really matter why. But she is here. She is on. And I thought, the topic today is going to be mostly coronavirus, feline and human coronavirus, with really a focus on feline. But of course, we'll talk about human as well. But a couple other things I want to touch on just briefly before we get into the coronavirus part. But first, by way of introduction, I'm going to introduce my wife for her. So Jen is she's not like us normal human beings. Let's put it that way. She is. She did not go. She did not go to high school. She went straight to college. So she's a regular Doogie Howser. Graduated from college at the age of 18. Went to graduate school. And she was in law school for a little bit. I think she was almost a doctor. She's done many different things and ended up in research. And she's done a ton of stuff in research, mostly in infectious disease and highly dangerous pathogens research. So things like bubonic plague, anthrax, Eastern equine encephalitis, different encephalitis viruses, and et cetera, and of course coronavirus. In addition to her academic bona fides and intellectual bona fides, she is a accomplished athlete. She was a state of Virginia women's fencing champion. She was a competitive swimmer and basketball player, and she's also, I would suggest, close to a black belt, if not a black belt level in Krav Maga, which is a
Not even close.
not even close. All right, I disagree. I disagree. But her school in Tijuana does not give out belts, so we don't actually know. But she's a highly accomplished, let's say, martial artist. Although Krav Maga not necessarily a martial art per se, but in any event. So, and she's also quite good with weapons. So she's a very accomplished shooter of rifles and handguns. She can also shoot a bow, crossbow. Very good with knives and swords as well. So potentially very dangerous and also a very smart person. Obviously, a very, very smart person. And she's welcome. So I finally got her to join the show. Thanks so much, Jen, for joining us. And I'm going to kick things off with a question. Unless you want to add something on your background, I'm going to kick things off with a question, not about feline coronavirus or human coronavirus, but about Australia. Because you were also a field biologist for 5 years. You worked in Australia, the Daintree rainforest, actually, for 5 years, which is unbelievable. So those who don't know, the Daintree rainforest is one of the most dangerous places in the world. I think the number of deadly species per square yard or square meter is just a ridiculous number. It's a very, very dangerous place. People don't go there, and people certainly don't spend 5 years of their lives there. And I'm just wondering if you could just briefly tell us, first of all, why you were there and how you ended up there.
So I wasn't a field biologist. I was actually doing infectious disease research, first
Okay.
off.
Okay.
And I was there doing postgraduate work because I wanted experience doing some degree of epidemiology, which you are not legally allowed to do in the States if you're not a clinician. But the
Okay.
rules in Australia and Europe allow you to do that as an academic because their clinical medicine division is restricted for treating patients, not doing things like epidemiology.
Okay.
And my posting was in the northern end up in the Daintree around Cape Tribulation and Cairns as a for neglected tropical diseases.
Okay. And what was the disease that you were investigating?
Mycobacterium ulcerans,
And
or the
what?
Borrelia ulcer.
Yeah, tell me about that disease. What is it? Exactly does it do?
It's like leprosy on steroids. It is a flesh-eating microbacteria that burrows into the skin and the muscle and then slowly progresses into burrowing into the bone. One of the things that's a primary focal point about it is no one really knew at that time how you got it, and it's progressive, but it causes a painless lesion, so most people end up with it, and they don't really worry about it because it doesn't hurt
And it's
until the
painless
wound
because
gets
of why?
bigger,
Why is it painless? Why is it painless? If your skin's getting
because
eaten
the
away,
toxin kills your nerve,
this
kills the
pathogen
nerve
actually
and nerve.
it actually excretes a substance, right, of some sort that deadens the nerve, or in some way, as I understand.
Yes, it produces a host family of toxins called mycolactones that destroy the nerve tissue. So you don't feel it because it's eating your flesh. And people will actually it's better known in Africa than it is many other places. It's actually only restricted in Australia to 2 small areas. But
Okay.
in Africa, it actually eats away at skin and tissue until sometimes you'll see children and things with, like, just their bones on their legs and their ankles because it eats all the tendons and it eats all the flesh and it eats everything. And if people get it on their abdomen, then it eats their internal organs and they die of sepsis, but they're not in any pain.
Yeah. But lovely, lovely. Anyhow, so they obviously want to get rid of this disease
Mhm.
in the rainforest.
But
I
it's
guess
highly, like tuberculosis, it's highly antibiotic resistant.
so highly okay, and
So
it's
very few things actually work to treat it.
right, and they didn't really know how. So in the rainforest, the Daintree rainforest, the indigenous population was affected with this, as I understand, and they did not know where it was coming from, and so they wanted to determine where actually it was
It
coming from,
wasn't
and that
just
was
the indigenous population, it was also the towns and communities in the area. The idea or the unique thing about that part of Northern Australia is that in other places that it exists, it's much more widespread. So, like down around Melbourne, Australia, it's very widespread across the plains. And there are a number of people that get it every year, but there's no way to define kind of why or where they got it. In the particular area in northern Queensland, up around Douglas, that it occurs in, there is a 9 square mile area that all cases can be traced back to that area. So the idea behind the research I was doing was to understand why did it only occur in that small area? What did it need? Why did, because the environment was the same in other areas around there, but why was it restricted to that zone? To try to get a better understanding of what it actually had to spread and what it actually needed in order to thrive in the environment.
and so how did you screen for it? Like, how did you test for it to determine where it was in the environment? Like, what were you doing
So
specifically?
we did mosquito sampling, we did various biting insect sampling, soil sampling, fish sampling, a
I
little bit
imagine
of everything.
I imagine the mosquitoes in the Daintree rainforest are not your average everyday mosquito. I would imagine they're pretty probably amped up. I
They're
would think
much
there's quite a
prettier.
number of them.
They're actually much prettier. There's a couple of species up there, like the Coqueletidias, that are absolutely beautiful. They're orange and they're like neon orange, neon yellow with little black noses and black legs. They're actually very, very pretty as they come for you and bite you.
They're pretty mosquito. Actually, the funny story, side story, when first met Jen, it was actually a job interview. And the only time she perked up during the interview was when I asked her about, when she started talking about mosquitoes. And she was talking about how beautiful they were and pretty they were. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, what? But in any event, any case, interesting side story. But she's really into mosquitoes. And I get that, that there's a ton of them there in the Daintree and you're capturing them. Weren't you also looking at large animals like saltwater crocs and things like that, or no? That was something else.
Yes, we did that to understand some of the animal reservoir things. So sharks, saltwater crocodiles, snakes, other things that were in the environment.
So you've actually captured and wrestled these saltwater crocs. Are you with people that did this?
No, so what I did is I went to, there are a number of farms and sanctuaries. So as you might expect, saltwater crocodiles mature very, very slowly.
Right.
So, and in Australia, there is beef, but beef is very expensive because beef is only grown in Western Australia out in Perth because the entire middle of the country is a desert. So on the eastern coast, where you have the whole stretch from like Melbourne up to Cairns, you get a lot of other meat. You get a lot of fish. People eat kangaroo, but one of the other primary meat sources that is farmed are crocodiles. And saltwater crocodile is a normal, you would have crocodile burgers and crocodile steaks and these other things. This is a normal meat source because it's fairly abundant and it's fairly inexpensive. And it's good for you. It's actually very lean, nice lean meat without much fat on it and very low in cholesterol. So but crocodiles, until they're, I think it's like 50 or 60 years old, they're not mature enough to reproduce. And crocodile reproduction, as you might imagine, is kind of a violent thing.
50, at 50
A lot of
old.
a lot of times when they put a female crocodile and a male crocodile together, one of them will kill the other one. They won't necessarily accept each other. So a lot of the farms do this thing in the north where so it's illegal to kill a saltwater crocodile because they're
Right.
considered a protected species. So a lot of the farms in the north, in addition to zoos, will take in adult problem crocodiles.
Problem.
Like
True.
a problem crocodile is a
I was
crocodile
too violent.
that's gotten large enough in a particular area that it's killed some people, or so. And I forget what the number is on like the number of people that have had to either be killed or severely injured by a problem crocodile in order to justify its relocation. But
Uh-huh.
when like the equivalent of Fish and Wildlife goes to relocate it, they have
Uh-huh.
to have somewhere to take it.
Right.
So a lot of times, so sometimes they'll take it to a zoo if they have room there. Sometimes they'll take it to a sanctuary if there's one that will volunteer to take it. And sometimes, if a farm needs a breeder and agrees and signs a contract with the government that says they're not going to kill it, they'll take it to a farm.
Okay. And so what does that have to do with
So
sampling though? So when did you start? Where did you get the sample at? Where does this come to the?
so I had a map of places that where because there's a focal point in the Northern Territory as well, but from where these different crocodiles had been within our area of interest, and I had was able to make contacts at some of the facilities and things and make arrangements to be able to go in and take blood
These are
samples and tissue
from
punch blood.
relocated
Yes,
crocs that had
from
been
their
buried within
relocated
the same.
crocodile and fecal samples
Yeah.
from their relocated
So
crocodiles.
so fecal samples and tissue punch samples is what you're taking from the crocodiles. Okay.
Yes.
How does
So
one
and
do that? How does one go about collecting a fecal sample and or a tissue biopsy
so
from
the
one of the
fecal
crocodiles?
samples are easy because you can get them in the water, but tissue punch biopsies or coagular swabs, which is the other thing that we took, they have to rope the crocodile and you have to have, depending upon the size, 3 to 4 people come and sit on the crocodile while you take the swabs and the samples. So
I
it
think
was
yeah. So you had so you're the person taking the sample while the five people are sitting on it or whatever.
yes.
So, and how big was the crocodile? These are like 20, 30 feet long. I mean, these are huge, right? I mean, they're big, aren't they?
I think the largest one, it was a little short because part of its tail had gotten cut off by a boat propeller at one point.
Yeah. All right.
It was like, I wanna say 15, 16 feet,
Okay.
and it was 150 plus years old, and it was old enough that it had actually turned from green to black.
They turn black
So,
when they get older. Okay.
yeah.
That is so scary. That's gonna be a scary looking croc. Anyways, okay. So did you ever find any? Actually, did you ever find any of the mycobacterium in the crocodiles or
Yes.
in the samples?
Yeah.
You did. Okay.
And that was
Wait.
kind of an interesting point. We kind of learned that reptiles in those areas end up being turtles and crocodiles end up being reservoirs because they are able to wall the infection off, and for whatever reason in them, it doesn't produce lesions, it doesn't produce ulcers. It sort of sits in an inactive phase, but they're able to sort of trek it around in the environment.
And they spread it. I see. Okay, interesting. Okay, so then, okay, so now you found at least one source. There's other sources, I guess you found. What? How did you ultimately discover or figure out where this thing was coming from, or did you discover where it was coming from?
I don't know that we still know that entirely because we had a couple of places there had been a large number of cases around it, and it seemed like correlating with heavy rain seasons that there were more cases, and that the soil at the bottoms of these hills tested positive, and then they were strongly positive for Mycobacterium ulcerans. And so we had permission to go up or try to go up. I mean, you can imagine going up in the Daintree rainforest is not all that easy, especially in places that don't have in sections of it that don't necessarily have roads or other
Yeah,
things. And
yeah, yeah.
try to go up the top of the hill. And we only, I think, during the time I was there, we only made it 3/4 of the way up, but the samples became more and more positive the higher up you went.
So the idea was that it was at the top of this particular hill, and this hill also was radioactive or something, as I recall. There was something unusual else
The
about it.
hill was a source of white clay, and there was thought to be uranium deposits at the top of the hill. There were reports of that in a lot of the geological ends of things. So that was thought to be an area. But I mean, you had lots of equipment didn't work the higher up you got to the hill, and so it was kind of an
Did you ever
interesting
take
place.
a Geiger counter up there to make sure you weren't just getting
No,
dosed with? No, okay. Typical.
no, we didn't have one because
Yeah,
it wasn't a
I understand. Interesting. So, anyways, all right. Well, the theory was that it was coming from the top of this hill, associated with your uranium deposits potentially. No, whether or not that has anything to do with the mycobacteria being there? Probably, maybe just a coincidence, but interesting nonetheless. But so 5 years of their life basically is collecting mosquito samples and crocodile samples
yes,
in Daintree rainforest. So, all right. So, all right. Well, that's it. That's the only non-coronavirus thing I want to talk about briefly. But so moving on to the main topic, and I want to ask about first of all Loki. So one thing I did not mention about Jen is that she owns a cattery, or I guess we own a cattery together, and so it breeds show cats and shows cats. I mean, we take in street cats. We do all kinds of different things with cats. Big cat house. I think we have currently 14 or so in the house. Oriental short hairs are the breed that we prefer or raise. And so, uh, well, who's Loki, and what happened to Loki, and what does this have to do with feline coronavirus?
so Loki is an adult male cat in my cattery. He is an Oriental Shorthair, and he has been on the show circuit for about 3 years now. And at one of the last shows that he went to, he picked up panleukopenia virus, which is a feline respiratory infection, and feline coronavirus infection that turned into neurological FIP.
Okay. So the cat show circuit, for the people who don't know what the cat show circuit, what that means, there's a much like with dogs, there is an organization. There are several organizations in the U.S. and internationally where you can bring cats. They're judged against a standard for the particular breed, and then they get points, and you get awards and different things. And it's like a competition, but it's a friendly competition. It's more about there's social aspects, but it is a competition. And the scoring system is Byzantine. It's completely unintelligible to the average person, but it's an interesting world, and as you might, as everyone loves cats, obviously that's involved in this world. And so Loki is a pretty, I would say, yes, fairly successful cat. He's been pretty well judged, I guess.
Yes.
Word. Okay. So he went to the show in just north of where we live, and or no, was that where it was? I forget where the show was. In San
Yes, it
Diego.
was just north of San Diego.
It's north of San Diego, and he ended up getting these two viruses, and we figured that out. How did you figure out that he actually had? How did we confirm that he had these viruses?
So he became extremely ill at a show we went to the following weekend and ended up actually hospitalized at our emergency veterinarian for a week. And they did PCR testing to test for what he might have. And this is what it came back for. And in the 2 months prior to that, he had not been anywhere traveling or going to shows or interacting with any other cats. So the only place that he went was 7 days prior to his becoming symptomatic.
And feline, just for people, feline coronavirus and human coronavirus are not the same thing, correct? Maybe you can explain briefly the differences between the two and the similarities.
So human coronavirus, so they're both coronaviruses, but there are two different subfamilies in the coronavirus family, alpha coronaviruses and beta coronaviruses. So human coronaviruses like COVID, like the original SARS and MERS, all belong to their beta coronaviruses. Feline coronavirus and dog coronavirus are actually alpha coronaviruses. So they're similar in that they're coronaviruses. They do similar-esque things, but they're two different virus subfamilies.
And they don't, and the one does not infect the other, or do they? Or do we know for sure?
We know that human coronaviruses like COVID can infect cats. We know that animal coronaviruses like dog and cat coronavirus cannot infect people.
But when human coronaviruses infect cats, they don't get sick or as sick as people do, or do they?
With the current COVID coronaviruses, they do not get as sick as people. They might get the sniffles for a few days and then recover.
Right, but there could be a variant that's not is not true of, and older variants were more dangerous to cats, as I understand. Is that correct?
Older variants, anything that was from the original and the beta version and the Delta variant, those all, and gamma coronavirus, those were all significantly more dangerous to cats, especially young cats.
And cats can spread the disease also to people, correct? They could be vectors.
I don't think there was ever any data produced on that, and I think that it was one of those things that it really wasn't known because there wasn't data and there wasn't testing.
And no one really wanted to know the answer. I don't think probably is part of that too. So, in any event, but the cat.
And I will say
Uh,
humans do a good enough job in spreading coronavirus so they don't worry about other organisms spreading it because they do that all by themselves.
That's true. That's a very good point. But the feline and cat and dog coronaviruses do not infect humans, and so there's
Correct.
no concern. So with the fact that we had it in the house was not a concern for us. Although we did get the sniffles, or I got sniffles. At least you got the sniffles from exposure. I think high level exposure.
You can get some degree of inflammatory response from exposure, especially because the antibodies to COVID do cross-react somewhat with the feline and dog coronaviruses. But the virus can't infect us. It can't replicate. But if you are exposed to a high enough level, it's like anything else. If you're
Yeah,
exposed to a significant amount of salmonella in food, you're not you even if you're immune, you might get a little green for a few hours, even if you don't get sick.
yeah. So typically what is the prognosis for a cat that has feline coronavirus?
So before COVID and before COVID therapeutics were developed or used for feline coronavirus, if you had a cat that presented with what's called FIP or feline infectious peritonitis that's caused by feline coronavirus, it would be 96 to 98% lethal. But not most feline coronavirus doesn't do that. So feline coronaviruses are very, very common. They're very common in cattery settings. They're very common in shelter settings. And 90+% of the time, they don't do anything significant. Cats don't even get sick. They're just sort of one of those ubiquitous things, kind of like the common cold in people.
Even
They don't-
unvaccinated cats.
Even
Not,
unvaccinated cats, they don't, because there's no vaccine for feline coronavirus.
oh, there's not.
Well, there is, but it doesn't work very well.
Okay.
But
Okay.
the idea is that it, generally speaking, it exists in a lot of cats and a lot of catteries with no negative effects whatsoever, and it doesn't cause a problem. For reasons that are not really understood yet, there is a situation, the virus mutates in a susceptible cat. And it's not known whether stress causes susceptibility. It's not known whether genetics plays a role. It's not really understood what causes the difference. But then the coronavirus that the cat is infected with mutates and becomes this form that causes severe life-threatening disease. And prior to
What are
COVID
the
here,
symptoms? Yeah. So what are the symptoms of that disease?
it depends on the presentation. There's 4 different ones. So there's wet, which causes like this abdominal swelling or pleural effusions that collapse the lungs, and it's called wet FIP. There's dry FIP, which is the animal develops this high fever and pneumonia and gastrointestinal symptoms, but there's no fluid exudate either in the abdominal cavity or the lungs, so it's classified as dry. There is an eye version, an eye and a neurological version, which can present as sudden paralysis. The cat suddenly develops the inability to walk, or muscle weakness, or eye symptoms where the eyes cloud and produces this very characteristic clouding in one eye, or eye color changes. And then there's the combination of dry neurological, which is what Loki had. So they get both the dry version and they get a neurological that tends to cause respiratory distress
And
and acute cardiac symptoms.
how quickly does all this stuff happen? I mean, how quickly is the cat dead typically after they've
It
had?
it depends on the form. Dry neurological death is usually within 48 to 72 hours.
Wow, so very fast.
Sometimes faster, sometimes it's 24 to 48. Neurological can be 24 to 48. Dry and wet, it's highly variable. It can be anywhere from 48 hours to several weeks.
So most people probably by the time a test result, or even they think to test for this thing, it's probably too late for the cat at that point. I would think.
It depends. And like I said, prior to some of the discoveries with coronavirus treatment in people and some of the repurposing and retesting of those drugs to see if they also work for cat coronavirus, the disease was like 98% lethal. There were a handful of reported cases of cats that had been treated successfully with steroids to suppress the inflammatory response and had survived with partial recovery, but it was pretty much considered a death sentence.
And just for folks to know briefly, Jen is not a veterinarian, even though she sounds like one, and she probably knows more than most
Not, I'm an infectious
veterinarians.
disease scientist.
but
I'm
but
exclusively a scientist.
she knows more than most veterinarians. In fact, almost every veterinarian I've ever met about most of these things. Especially,
No,
obviously, when it comes to infectious disease, for
no, I
sure.
disagree with that.
But in any case, she's more up to date on the current literature. But anyways, so just want to make that clear. People, not a veterinarian, so she's not giving veterinary advice here to anybody at any point in this discussion. But make that clear. Anyways, so tell me about these treatments. And there's this these treatments were not really developed for cats. So how did they end up being used in cats? And what are
So,
they specifically?
so the original one that was tested is an analog of remdesivir called GS441524. And remdesivir is it's an antiviral. It affects RNA polymerase, which is required for most viruses to do anything. And in fact, almost all
Right.
antivirals that exist in the world today are targeted towards RNA polymerase, or at least for the RNA viruses. So like Tamiflu, that's what it targets. It targets the influenza RNA polymerase.
The RDRP.
So
That's the
RDRP.
RNA dependent RNA protease for those
Correct.
RNA
And
dependent DNA.
remdesivir was originally developed by Gilead to target the RNA polymerase, the RDRP, for Ebola, but it failed clinical trials. And so one of the
That
repurposing,
must have been a heck of a clinical trial.
well,
That's one heck
it's
of a clinical trial. I can't imagine
some
that.
of the some
I
of
mean, you could
the
die.
some of the repurposing. Well, some of the repurposing then during emergency use, it worked initially very very well for COVID, and it was actually used to be used as a positive control in a lot of cell culture and a lot of COVID studies, as because it was the only therapeutics that really worked. But then later variants of COVID mutated away in a form that it doesn't work as well as it used to. It's still used in some emergency settings inpatient,
Right.
but so there was a lot of interest after that because there had been a lot of people that had known about FIP and the mortality in cats, and there was some push to evaluate this medication that was sort of falling out of favor in clinical settings as you had successful vaccination, as you had other therapeutics
And
like
they
Paxlovid and
Gilead,
molnupiravir.
Gilead had spent millions on this thing. They made a shit ton of
No.
it, as I understand. So they had a whole big
So
stockpile, which was basically useless now, or mostly useless. And they're trying to
so
for something to do with it.
well, yeah, so the idea was that then, what else could this be used for? And so this was an area that there was a lot of interest in, and the early tests were really, really good, that the results were almost 90+% success in treatments, and there's the case literature and the published literature for the use of this in treating cats with FIP is really, really, really good. There's probably more than 15,000 different case studies and data points that indicate it's very, very safe. It's very, very effective.
But the catch
It's
is
effective
it's not
even though
approved
given
by
late.
so it's not this is not approved by any regulatory body. So typically veterinary drugs in the United States, just for information and listeners, are required and FDA approval is required for vets to use them to prescribe them. This drug does not have such an approval, and so in order to get it, you can't technically get it in a, let's say, legal. I don't know legal is the right word, in a non-regulated fashion. You're not supposed to be able to get this, but you can. And how exactly do you go about doing that?
Well, it's sort of a hairy issue because the issue for it not being licensed or FDA approved is not because the data isn't there.
Right.
It's not because it isn't safe. It's not because it isn't effective. It isn't effective. And in fact, there's probably more data showing that this is safe and effective in cats than there is for almost any other therapeutic that's been recently approved on the market for anything. The
Yeah.
problem is that Gilead still owns the patent and that it was not medication's never been licensed for use because essentially no one who has had the authority or the ability to negotiate them for use for licensing use has been able to do it, be successful at it, and has paid the necessary fees
Yeah. And
for
it's
the application to the FDA to be able to license it. So without there being some sort of pending application or pending sponsorship company, it exists in this sort of limbo land.
but
So like
people
right
have it.
now, if you, so veterinarians know about it, they're legally allowed to prescribe it. There are 4 mail order pharmacies in the US that are well-respected pharmacies that have sources of it, and they will compound it for you and mail it to you if you have a veterinary prescription. But it kind of exists in this limbo land nexus of
But there's also there's sort of an underground network, if you will, people that have it that are around the world, even I guess, that
it's
distribute.
not underground and it's not
Well,
underground
maybe
at
it's not
all.
underground. Maybe that's the wrong word.
There are 2 big international groups that have sort of spearheaded getting this medication to be available to people worldwide. Called One is called FIP Global, and the other, which is called FIP Warriors. And they are groups of people that have had cats, either that have been successfully treated with FIP. Some of them are veterinarians, some of them are veterinary technicians, some of them are scientists, but have put together sort of a global movement to be able to source this medication and provide emergency doses.
And it's expensive, correct? I mean, this is not a cheap medication. I mean, it's not correct. Oh, did I lose you?
Correct.
Okay, I'm losing. I lost audio there. Are you still there, Jen?
1 second, sorry. All right. So yeah, it's very much one of those. It's much cheaper than it used to be. It used to cost a treatment dosage of this medication used to cost $5,000 to $6,000
Wow. A treatment
out of
dosage is what? Is how long and how much are we talking?
so it's 84 to 100 days of treatment. 84 is the standard treatment course, and it's once a day, unless it's neurological FIP, in which case it's twice a day.
Okay.
And so, but it used to be, $5,000 to $6,000 for a full treatment course. Now you can get a full treatment course for like 400 to 600. So it's come down comparatively to what it used to be. But the big thing that used to be a major problem that these 2 groups really help with is that if you've got dry neurological involvement at all, and you don't start treatment immediately, 24 hours later, 48 hours later, the chances of saving the cat are pretty slim.
And
And even for some of the other forms, even wet forms and stuff, you don't have 4 to 5 days to wait for something to arrive in the mail. And most pharmacies, because of the expense of the medication, because it's not a licensed FDA-approved medication, are not stocking the medication. So you can't just go with a
Yeah.
prescription to your local pharmacy and get it.
Right.
It's not that simple.
Right.
And so these guys help. A lot of times they'll ask people they have a prescription, they'll connect them to veterinarians that are familiar with the disease. They provide individuals with administrative and case support to connect to people who know what to look for, what tests need to be run on the cats, and can refer them to the appropriate veterinarians. But they also keep emergency doses on hand to supply people with enough medication to get them to even being able to get
Get their own supply. Yeah, I see. I
their
see.
own supply of it so
So
that the
what
cat
happens?
doesn't die in the interim.
So Loki is safe and healthy now. Again, he's one of the lucky one. He's lucky, very lucky. And so, how long did it take for him to recover? I mean, he's still recovering, correct? As I understand, he's
He's
not.
still not 100%, and he may or may not ever be 100%. We'll see. He's close, but he also had treatment immediately because the same day he was diagnosed, since we didn't have access to the GS 441524, he was started on molnupiravir because that's what we could get.
And that's a human coronavirus uh,
Mhm.
therapeutic.
So molnupiravir and Paxlovid are human medications for coronavirus. They're not as well studied for FIP as the GS 441524, but there is emerging data that shows that molnupiravir also works. It's the difference between 96% of cats survive and recover when treated with GS 441524 and 87% survive with molnupiravir. But
So pretty
molnupiravir
right,
has more side effects.
more side
But
effects.
oh, but sometimes there's also been, because a cat can always relapse with this after they've had it once, that if the cat relapses, they treat in combination of GS with one of the other two, either Paxlovid or molnupiravir, and that
What's
often works better.
what's the one that you worked on? I always forget the COVID therapeutic, the human therapeutic that you worked on. None of those, correct? Or is it one of those?
It is, but I can't actually talk about that.
All right, all right, party pooper.
Sorry.
anyway, anyway, all right. So, okay, but I want to go back to the neurologic thing, the neurological symptoms, and so in human coronavirus cases, obviously, there is also a neurological component, and you were one of the first people to mention to me that you're thinking around the idea that really COVID should have been a encephalitic disease rather than a respiratory disease, and
It's
maybe
both.
it is
It's
both.
both. And
Yeah,
it's well known now that it is both. That
yeah.
part of the respiratory distress with COVID comes from severe inflammation of a primary infection in the respiratory tissue. But it's also known now that the pocket of nerves that gets infected actually provides access of the virus to the brain. And it does in many people, especially those with long term COVID, end up infecting brain tissue. And like people that have had repeated bouts of COVID often do have on CAT scan or on MRI significant alterations to their scans and to their imaging of their brain tissue. So it is fairly well known, and it's known that some of the respiratory depression, some of it is primary and some of it is secondary neurological. So I think there is we know coronaviruses can do this, so it's not shocking, I think, that
But this is
something like
unlike
that.
it's unlike MERS and the original SARS, correct? They were not neurologically involved, or
No,
were they?
they do this too. They do that too.
Okay, yeah, interesting, interesting.
They're just not anywhere at this point as well studied as COVID, because
Yeah,
COVID, sort of swept through everywhere. So it's the difference in magnitude of cases versus a very small number of cases.
but MERS, as I understand, was actually more dangerous. Is that right, or it had worse symptoms? I don't actually remember the MERS story. Maybe you can.
MERS kills like 70% of people that are infected
And why is it not more prevalent than MERS? Because of that.
because it kills them too quickly.
Yeah, that's the great irony of highly infectious diseases. It's the
It's
guilt
MERS
fame.
is not it's not as transmittable as COVID. It's never undergone the same changes that made COVID really, really like the difference. I mean, the original Washington variant of COVID was less transmittable than the current one that's out there now. Anything after Omicron spreads like wildfire. So MERS is in the camp where it's significantly less transmittable and it's significantly more fatal. So people tend to isolate people who develop MERS significantly more than they do people who say have COVID.
COVID. And so and what's the current situation with COVID in the U.S. right now or globally? Do you have any sense of that? I don't know how much you keep up with the literature, the human COVID literature, or you look at the reports.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere in the US. It's fairly the US, I think, has more of it than most other places. I only sort of peripherally keep up on the literature on that, but a lot of other countries have really pushed COVID vaccination, and vaccination rates in the US are very poor for the most part. So, as is belief in viruses and other things that, and
Right. So you've actually worked, according to many people, been working with things your entire career that don't actually exist. So all those tubes you were manipulating in the laboratory, there was just nothing in them apparently this whole time, even though you could clearly see the effects on
but I,
human.
but I think it's the difference in, the MERS is much scarier. And so
Yeah.
people tend to be, because of the mortality rate and even the recovery rate, people don't just bounce back from MERS
Yeah.
with, and it's very similar in some ways to the original SARS, which was somewhere between COVID and MERS on the lethality spectrum. Like maybe 30% of people died. It sort of is one of those things that people who did recover never really fully recovered for the most part.
And
So you ended up kind of with a greater stigma societally and a maybe we don't want that as opposed to people that can kind of brush COVID off as being only certain populations of people are truly affected by COVID and oh
the,
well.
and the great irony with COVID is the people that get the least sick actually spread it the
Mhm.
most. Because
Sure.
it appears because they actually are carried they don't the virus is not replicate or it replicates at really high levels but doesn't impact their immune system is not as reactive to it. They don't get as many symptoms. But they go around everywhere because they think they're good. They think they're well. They don't think they're sick, and they're shedding huge amounts. And we actually
Sure.
one of these so-called super shedders, Jen and I, we confirmed this with our own testing when back in the day. And she is not. She's one of these people that's very sensitive to coronavirus and to SARS. So it's a bad match in that sense. And we so it's really kind of one of the great ironies of COVID. People that say, "Oh, I don't get sick from COVID," they really probably are getting sick, and they're in fact the ones that are making everybody else sick by not staying home or whatever. So anyhow, and I don't know how many people are aware of that. I think most people probably are by now, or maybe they're not. Maybe they have no idea. But it just goes to show if you really do, if you have any symptoms of illness, again, they got to stay home. People are going out and treating it like it's no big deal. Maybe for them, it's no big deal. I mean, I get that, but for people who are really sensitive to COVID,
Well, in point of
like
fact, it's not significantly different than measles, right? So like right now in the US, there are two significant measles outbreaks and people quarantined. And the fact of the matter is yes, measles is dangerous to the unvaccinated population, but that's not often where the real tragedy with measles strikes. So one of the places that people like, well, I have a coworker who's pregnant and she is terrified right now because she is in her third trimester of a very much wanted pregnancy. She and her husband struggled to get pregnant. They actually had to go for fertility treatment, so they are really trying to be careful.
yeah,
But pregnant women don't have a strong immune system
yeah,
because one of the things that happens when women are pregnant, in order to prevent aborting and inadvertently killing the fetus, the immune system dampens down. It
yeah.
doesn't function as well to protect the unborn child. So pregnant women are susceptible to many things that
Even if they're
people
vaccinated,
are not, even if
yeah,
they're vaccinated. So, like for example, my colleague at work, I really feel for her right now because if she goes to the grocery store and somebody else who doesn't want to be vaccinated, who doesn't believe they need to stay home when they're sick, if they have measles
yeah.
and she comes into contact with them, she may very well lose her baby.
And or herself or her own life even.
But
And
well, no, usually it just causes miscarriage because the measles
yeah,
virus can infect her and then would kill the kid.
yeah, I see.
And so and the problem is that a lot of people who are in this, well, I'm really not that sick. Well, for me, it's just a rash. It doesn't matter to them if it kills somebody else's child.
Yeah, yeah.
It
Well,
because and that's kind of, and I think most of the time they don't realize that that is the potential
yeah.
consequence. Because they're just thinking about it being, oh well, maybe somebody will feel bad or maybe somebody will get a rash, but it's a different level of consequence.
And as more and more people get unvaxxed, become not vaccinated, then it becomes even more and more serious. And measles spreads pretty easily, as I understand. Highly infectious in that sense. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, it's highly infectious.
Yeah, and that's one of these diseases that had been what we thought. I mean, basically was eradicated, which now because of this whole anti-vaccine thing is coming on the comeback, which is really quite sad. But in the event, Jen, by the way, is one of the most heavily vaccinated people on the planet. her vaccination card is like a book. It's like 6 feet thick. From a career of working with very unusual and highly dangerous pathogens. There are many vaccines. People aren't really aware of this either. There are lots of vaccines that exist for many things people probably have never heard of. And Jen has just about all of them. So
That's what happens when you choose to work with those things.
yes. And then maybe you could talk a little bit. That's one thing we could talk about too is working in containment. So BSL-3. So now, so there's called biosafety levels in research, in biological research. So there's 1 through 4. One being, average things that are not pathogenic. They won't make you sick. You can, drink them. You do whatever with them. Like bacteria that are good for you or whatever. Things like that, or BSL-1. Then you have the BSL-2 pathogens, which are things like the salmonellas and the E. coli's that will make you sick if you're exposed at high numbers, but they typically aren't, deadly or lethal. They don't spread all that easily. Then you move up in levels to level 3, where they can be very dangerous, but they don't necessarily spread all that easily. All the way up to level 4, where they spread easily and they're super dangerous. So Ebola is a classic example of the BSL-4, and BSL-3 is a little bit, is where the more like say on the edge type pathogens hang out, and that's mostly what you worked with, Jen, right? And what were some of the organisms that fall in that BSL-3 category?
BSL-3 organisms tend to be things like Venezuelan equine encephalitis virus, Eastern equine encephalitis virus, bubonic plague, anthrax, botulism, some of these things that have the potential for high abuse that are classified as highly dangerous if you are exposed, but carry less risk of community exposure.
All right, so lower transmissibility overall. But working with them requires some significant safety precautions and procedures. And maybe you could talk about some of that, what the requirements are.
Some of it I can, and some of it I cannot, as you are
To
aware.
the extent you can, the extent you can't talk about some of the things.
So, so,
For
so,
instance, what do you have to wear? Go
so
ahead.
many of these things after 9/11 are classified as select agents. So you have to have first a background security clearance and approval by the federal government to be able to work with them in an approved government authorized facility. And there are a lot of security procedures, as you might imagine, with that to contain those and to prevent the risk of them falling into the wrong hands. That part I can't really discuss.
Fine.
But in terms of the biological component, I mean, to work with something that's BSL-3, usually all of these rooms and chambers are negative pressure. They do not ventilate to the outside. You have to wear a full biohazard suit or a respiratory protection in order to go in. Everything gets removed. So as you go in, you will don a suit with a mask and a respirator. And as you leave, everything gets decontaminated with chemical spray, and you take these things off in order to leave. That usually, so you're not taking in anything or bringing anything out.
And these things are very uncomfortable. People probably don't realize that I spent a little bit of time in there with Jen in this lab, in this wearing these things, and it's like it's not comfortable. It's really difficult. You cannot the manipulations you need to make as a scientist, as a biologist, are difficult already. But then you're doing them in these suits, these awkward, and it's very sweaty. It's just super uncomfortable. And so I have a ton of respect for people like Jen who spent hours, I mean, literally, 12, 16-hour days at the height of coronavirus and of COVID, working on different things. And that's not a BSL-3 organism. At least it was not classified that way. It could have been, but it was not, thankfully. And mostly that's
What
so people could
COVID,
work
was
with it.
classified. COVID was classified
Originally,
as BSL-3.
it was
Even
originally.
it's still
It's what
BSL-3
I thought it was BSL-2 plus now or something.
for DNA testing. For things like
Yeah,
clinical sample handling and testing of clinical samples for positive or negative, it is classified as BSL-2 plus.
okay, that's what.
For growing of viruses or testing vaccines and therapeutics against virus challenge, it's BSL-3
It's 3, like MERS and SARS.
because of the amount that you're working with.
Yeah, so like botulism too, and similar with the toxin. But in any event, yeah, so it's not comfortable, and during COVID there was a ton of pressure to do a lot of work, obviously, and especially in the vaccine development world where Jen was working in the therapeutic world, and so they were spending incredibly long hours in these labs, her and her colleagues, in a very uncomfortable. I mean, it's just super uncomfortable. I could barely stand it for an hour or two. I can't imagine 12, 16-hour days for weeks on end. And so it's hard work. And, it's very difficult work, and ton of credit for the people who can do it, which includes Jen and not myself. I am not one of those people that could do that for sure, and I try to prove that. So, anyways, anyhow, well, thanks, Jen. I think I don't know how long we've been talking now, 45 minutes or so. I think I pretty much covered the things I wanted to talk about, and I really appreciate you taking the time. I think it was an interesting conversation for me, and these are the kind of conversations that Jen and I have all the time, and I wish I could record more of them and share them because she says and talks about some really fascinating stuff, and the world she works in and travels in is a really highly interesting one, and it's also extremely useful and helpful for people. And if it weren't for people like Jen, and her colleagues, there'd be a lot more people getting sick and dying out there. And our work has saved lives. I know that for a fact, many lives, and kept a lot of people from getting sick, including people you probably know if you're listening to this. I could almost guarantee it, just because her work has touched so many different people in so many different ways, in all positive ways. So thanks, Jen, for that. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I know it's been begging you to do this forever. So hopefully you'll come back and do
Yeah,
and do at least one more.
well, thank you.
There's so many other topics I would like to talk to you about that I have talked to you about in the past, but I think other people would be interested in hearing about as well. And so maybe I can get you to come back at some point. But thanks.
Maybe you might
Appreciate it.
negotiate on that. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Anyway, I saw there are a few people listening, not very many, but if you had any questions, you could shoot a question. Or, of course, you know how to get a hold of me on Substack or whatever. Just shoot me a question later. And, of course, assuming Jen's okay with it, I'll post this. And there's always some clips that come out, too, that we'll look at those and probably post those, assuming Jen's okay with it, too. So thanks. And thanks, Jen. Next time. Bye.